Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland. North Carolina has some unfinished business from the 2024 election, an uncertified race for a seat on the state Supreme Court. Recounts showed that Democratic incumbent Allison Riggs had 734 more votes than Republican Jefferson Griffin after the election, but the results have been tied up in court as Griffin challenged the eligibility of more than 60,000 ballots. The latest update in this case comes from the State Court of Appeals, which just ruled in favor of Griffin. WRAL state government reporter Will Doran has been covering this case, and he joins us now with the latest. Okay, so first let's go over why Griffin is challenging these results. The subject here is 60,000 ballots, as I said. What does he say is wrong with these?
Yeah, well, the question of why Griffin is challenging these ballots really has two different answers, depending on who you talk to. Griffin says that for most of the ballots in question, we can't be sure of the identity of the voters themselves, that the state has not done what it needs to do to verify that these people are who they say they are. The other side says that the state has done the work that it needs to do to identify them, and that Griffin is just cherry-picking voters to help him overturn his loss in the election. And so that's really the conflict here in this lawsuit. And like you said, Griffin won at the Court of Appeals. They ruled in his favor on everything. There's basically three different types of challenges that he has mounted against voters, and he won on all three of those different challenges.
Okay. And on the other side of this, the Court of Appeals, with their ruling, what did that three-judge panel say about these ballots?
Yeah, so the biggest chunk of these voters, there's about 60,000 people who are missing information in this database that the state keeps, basically just a big spreadsheet of all of the 7+ million registered voters here in North Carolina. And that's supposed to have either your social security number or your driver's license number on it. There are about 60,000 people. So a small percentage, but enough to sway this race, which was only decided by 734 votes back in November. They have missing information, and sometimes it's unclear if that's because they just didn't provide that information or if it's because it was just a typo. Say my name is Will, and the elections worker just typed it as WIL instead of putting that second L in. It would come up as, not matching my social security number because that's not really my name. But it's not really the voter's fault. But the court ruled that even though, no, this is not the voter's fault, this is still a problem and need to potentially throw out all of those ballots. Then there's also two other sources of challenges that target overseas voters. That's a few thousand voters. It's a smaller group, but it mostly focuses on people who vote overseas. They were not required to show voter ID this year. They've never been required to show voter ID. Griffin says that he thinks they should have been required to show voter ID, and the court ruled in his favor.
Okay, and so to be clear, the Court of Appeals did not declare Griffin the winner, right?
Correct.
Okay, so it sounds like most of these voters, but not all of them, will have a chance to fix their ballots.
Exactly. Those two groups that I just talked about are going to be able to fix the problems if this ruling stands. The people who have missing information can contact their county board of elections office and get that fixed. The people who are overseas or who had voted from overseas, because that could include soldiers who were on deployment but are now back, or college kids who were studying abroad but are now back, need to provide a copy of their photo ID to the state. So they're going to get the chance, if this ruling stands and their ballots are at risk of being thrown out, to prove who they are. There's a third group of people, and this is a much smaller group. It's only a few hundred of people who are what they call the never residents, people who have never resided within North Carolina, or at least never been an official resident of North Carolina, because they were born overseas. Usually it's like the kids of Christian missionaries or soldiers who were born in other countries, just turned 18. The state allows them to vote here in North Carolina, even if they're, a resident of another country, since they're a U.S. citizen and their parents are voters in North Carolina. there has never been a question about those people being able to vote. They've been able to vote for well over a decade here in North Carolina. The legislature actually voted unanimously back in 2011 to let those people vote. But Griffin says that that's unconstitutional, and the court agreed today and said that basically all of those people have to have their ballots thrown out.
Okay, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to hear about just how long this case could drag on. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL State Government reporter Will Doran about the still undecided race for an open seat on the state Supreme Court. The Court of Appeals just sided with Jefferson Griffin, the Republican in the race, and gave homework to some of these 60,000 voters. They will have 15 business days to fix their ballots. Will, what do you think is going to happen after that?
So this is definitely getting appealed, and what the most likely thing to happen is that this ruling gets paused. Now, it's possible that that doesn't happen and that this 15-day clock does start ticking quickly. So, people, if y'all are listening and you know that your name's on this list or your cousin's name is on this list or your roommate's friend, whatever, let them know that they need to go ahead and get it fixed because, 15 days is not a lot of time. And that, it could, you're going to have to mail something in, it could take a while. So it probably makes sense to go ahead and fix these issues if you know they exist for yourself or people in your life, even if this still gets tied up in the court system, which it almost certainly is.
Okay. And what is the political makeup of the Supreme Court here in North Carolina? What do political experts think will happen there?
Yeah, so like I said, this is definitely getting appealed. It will eventually end up at the state Supreme Court. And it has 7 members, but one of them is Allison Riggs, who is part of this whole issue. She has recused herself, so it is a 6-member court that's going to be dealing with this, and that includes 5 Republicans and 1 Democrat in those 6 people. And so every single stage of this process so far, the rulings have come down along party lines just about 100% of the time. This ruling for the Court of Appeals was a 2-to-1 ruling because there were 2 Republican judges and 1 Democratic judge. And so when it gets to the Supreme Court, it could be easy to say, okay, well, obviously, Griffin is going to win because Republicans have a big majority, but that's not necessarily the case. Actually, one of the Republican justices has already pretty explicitly said that he's going to be ruling against Griffin. He has dissented in a couple of the more procedural things. In this case, says that basically he doesn't think that this lawsuit should even be allowed to exist. That, basically tough luck. The election's over. You can't change the rules after the fact. That's that. So Riggs has at least 1 Republican on her side. If she can flip another Republican in the Supreme Court, could end in a 3-3 tie. And, then we get into the weeds of, civil rules and what happens when the Supreme Court ties. But that is a question for another day. We still have to get there first.
Okay. And, let's just go with the case that this goes along party lines. So Riggs could go from leading Griffin by 700 votes to losing the race entirely after Griffin takes his case through the court system. If these courts, which have a Republican majority, do rule in Griffin's favor, does Riggs have any recourse from there? And maybe this gets into some of those weeds you were just talking about.
Yes, it does. So people who have been following this case are probably incredibly confused. I'm incredibly confused by this case, and it's literally my job to follow it because it just keeps bouncing back and forth from court to court. It's in state court, then it goes up to federal court. Sometimes it's happening in both courts at the same time. Right now, the most recent decision basically was the federal court system saying, okay, we're going to be done with this for now and just let the state courts figure it out. But their ruling essentially says that if Griffin wins in state court, then the federal courts will almost certainly take it back up.
Okay.
So, if Riggs wins at the state Supreme Court and she keeps her seat, then that could be the end of it. But if she loses, she could have some issues of federal law to argue, and we could definitely see this case go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's already receiving a ton of national attention. The chairman of the Democratic National Party sent us a statement about the case. People are really watching this closely, and of course, if it goes all the way to SCOTUS, then it's going to get a ton more attention.
Right. And do you have any idea how long it would take for this case to get before the U.S. Supreme Court if it did get there? And then when might they rule from there? It just seems like this is just going to keep. I mean, we might be at the midterm elections or beyond that, it feels like, before this thing is settled. That
is definitely possible. I mean, here we are. We're, almost 6 months out from the election
right
now, and we're still talking about, okay, well, the middle part of the court process is done, and we still have all these steps to go. So, yeah, I mean, typically big lawsuits like this that go through a lot of different layers of the court system will take years. I mean, it's not uncommon for court cases to last 3 or 4 years. We have some court cases here in North Carolina that have lasted 20 plus years. This is not going to be one of those. Everyone involved in this recognizes that, hey, we need to kind of bend some of the normal rules, speed things up, go much quicker, because it's an important issue. I mean, we don't really know who our state Supreme Court justice is right now. Riggs has been allowed to keep serving in her seat while this plays out. That's how the state constitution sets up these kinds of issues. But we need to know as the people of the state, who holds this seat. Judges are elected to 8-year terms on the Supreme Court, and hopefully we have an answer well before this 8-year term is up.
Okay. Well, it will certainly be interesting to see how this develops. Thanks, Will. That's WRAL state government reporter Will Doran. For his latest on the battle over the Supreme Court seat, go to the NC Capitol section of WRAL.com. I'm Grace Holland. Thank you for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us a part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. That's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.